Before jumping into the episode, I want to remind y'all that I'm having an event November 23rd. It's called Women on a Mission 2020, where you'll be surrounded by other goal-oriented women. And our goal for that workshop is to do some effective goal planning for 2020. The link for the event tickets will be in the show notes. Oye, let's talk. What is therapy? So today I'm gonna explain what counseling or therapy is, and I'm gonna start off by reading an alphabet soup to you. So there are many different types of therapists. We have an LPC, an LCSW, LMFT, we have our PhDs and our MDs. Some of those aren't therapists, but we work well together. So, what is an LPC? An LPC is a licensed professional counselor. That's the license I have. And we provide counseling and therapy. Then we have an LCSW, which is a licensed clinical social worker. They also do therapy. Then we have the licensed marriage and family therapist. And as you can hear in their license name, they kind of specialize more in families and couples. Then you have psychologists, which are the PhDs. And what psychologists do, they don't necessarily do therapy. Some of them do, but they focus more on assessments and diagnosis. For example, they do a lot of testing. For example, to test for ADHD, test for Asperger. Well, it's not Asperger's anymore, right? It's autism. And just all these diagnoses, they do the testing. You have to be a doctor to do that, like PhD doctor. Then we have MDs, which are our medical doctors, the ones that went to medical school, which would be your psychiatrist. Your psychiatrists are the ones that kind of prescribe psychotropic medication. So let's say you're depressed and you need to be on medication, you would go to a psychiatrist. Counselors and therapists and psychologists cannot prescribe medication. You need to go to a psychiatrist for that. So if you ever wondered, who can counseling and therapy help? Well, I have your answer. It can help you. It can help me. It can help everyone. Okay? You don't necessarily need to be depressed or have anxiety to go to a therapist. Therapists help in many different aspects. They can help you kind of define your objectives or goals, overcome fears or insecurities, manage stress, handle anxiety, and obviously you can talk about your traumatic experience with them, help you improve your relationships with families and friends, develop a plan to deal with different types of crisis, because I know I'm not the only one that experiences crisis in my life. Everyone experiences some sort of crisis in their lifetime. We're all human, and it happens to us at one point in our life, right? It can also help you to set limits with others. Sometimes it's so hard to set boundaries and limits, especially with our family. And I know I'm talking about myself right now. Sometimes it's very hard to set these limits on, you know what? This is my boundary with you, and if you don't respect it, these are going to be the consequences. So it's really hard to do that sometimes. So talking about setting limits and boundaries with somebody that's outside of the picture can be very helpful. And it can also help with dealing with different issues such as like substance use and other types of issues we go through. Maybe you've been through a divorce, or just maybe it's not a divorce, but ending a relationship. Ending any type of relationship, it's hard. Even when it's a toxic relationship, it is hard to like end a relationship. And it could be because you're kind of used to that person, or because that person had a very big impact on your life. You know, it could be very different reasons. So I believe, and it's my honest belief, that anybody can benefit from going to counseling. So what do counselors do? Do we just kind of sit there and listen to you, and like what do we do? Okay, So, yes, we do sit there and listen. That's a big part of our job. But we're there to create a safe, warm, and supportive environment. And most importantly, it's a confidential space for you to talk about your difficulties and their causes. So, when you go to a counselor, we always go through like our first, this is what the first session looks like. Well, I'll talk about how the first session with me looks like. Each counselor kind of does it differently, but I think the majority of us kind of have the same format. So you go into counseling with this therapist and we introduce ourselves, and then before we start like talking about anything, we have to do paperwork, right? Everybody loves paperwork. I know I don't. I hate paperwork. I think that's what I hate about therapy is the paperwork, but it's very necessary. So we go through what we call a confidentiality or a consent form. We go through a consent form. What is the consent form? So in the consent form, we explain like what our modality is. There, we are therapists, but each of us does therapy a little bit differently because there are different schools of thought on therapy. Different theories, and we use that theory to kind of guide us in helping others. So the therapist is going to explain what type of theory they use, and then we'll let you know like what are the confidentiality aspects of therapy. So therapy is confidential. What does that mean? There is limits to that because, and I tell them in all my first sessions and sessions after that until they kind of get to know me and understand what's going on. So limits to confidentiality 101 right now. So therapy is confidential unless you report you're going to hurt yourself or hurt someone else, you report child abuse or elderly abuse, or if your records get subpoenaed by the court. So those are the main limits to confidentiality. Other than that, if you have like a chismosa tia or somebody that's all up in your business, and for example, they were to call me and be like, oh, hey, is fulanito de tal going to therapy with you? I would be like, well, I can't confirm or deny that they are my client, and I would hang up. So I'm not telling them yes, and I'm not telling them no. Or if, for example, if you're have your spouse and your spouse knows that they're going to therapy with whoever, and they call the therapist and be like, oh, I want information. What did y'all talk about? We can't give any information unless you sign a consent to release information. So we leave that power up to you. If you want somebody to have access to your information, you have to sign a paper and tell us it's okay to talk to my mom, or it's okay to talk to my husband or my wife or my mom or my dad, whoever it is. So we are very intentional, and like confidentiality is very important. That's something all of us take very seriously. So we all go through difficult times. I don't know a person who has a perfect life or who has never had a problem or crisis in their life. If you're that person, please talk to me. I want to know your secrets so I can incorporate them into my life. But a lot of people think that going to counseling is because you're weak. And, that's the biggest misconception there is, because going to counseling takes a lot of strength and courage. And every time I have somebody come in to counseling, or even when they give me a phone call, I feel very kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Honored for them to call me, because I know it's very hard to seek help for therapy. Why do I know that? Because it was hard for me to go to therapy and acknowledge that I needed help the first time I went to therapy. So it does not make you weak to go to therapy. If anybody's telling you that, tell them that they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Like, seriously, it makes you anything but weak. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to admit that you need help. And I recognize that it's not easy to admit that you need help when everybody thinks you're a strong person and that you have everything under control. Because we live in a society where you have to kind of have all your shit together, right? Especially now in the age of social media, We don't see those Instagram models and Instagram influencer posts about their shitty days, do we? We only see like perfection. So if you live that type of lifestyle, you're living in unrealistically, because realistically, all of us go through bad days, and we might have times where we're like, damn, I just can't get out of this rut or whatever. So if you think that going to therapy makes you not a strong person, just let me tell you, you're wrong, and that has no truth behind it. So, what are some of the perks? I call them perks of going to therapy. So, one that we already talked about is that everything's confidential, and I think another important one is there's no judgment. As counselors, we are not there to judge you. Um, a lot of people are afraid. They're like, oh, what are they gonna say? I get a lot of, well, let me be honest with you, and I'm like, okay, great, thank you for being honest with me. But if you lie to me, you're lying to yourself, because I'm here to listen to you, and whatever you tell me, I'm gonna take it as truth, because this is your story. This is what you want to tell me. That's not my story. And I'm here to kind of just listen to you and validate whatever you have to say. So there's no judgment. It also helps reduce stress. Sometimes we have coping skills, but they're not the best coping skills. They are unhealthy coping skills. And well, I know I do, work a lot with my clients on teaching them positive and healthy coping skills, because like when you're feeling stressed and you're like, oh man, I need a drink. Okay, you need a drink once in a while. It's not a bad thing, but if that's what you depend on when you're stressed and dealing with issues, that can lead to something more severe like alcoholism, and you don't want to put yourself in that situation. Um, so we teach you to create new coping skills. Also, another perk is to identify goals. Sometimes we're like lost, and just having somebody hear you out will help you with that. And you can like work on self esteem, and you have somebody to listen to you. Like, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, the majority of my job is listening to you. Obviously, there's different techniques and the actual therapy work, but I'm there. We are there, therapists, to listen to you. You can vent. Also, sometimes it's not like you're going to come in and vent every time, because, therapy is hard. Therapy requires work, requires commitment. And it's not just like, oh, okay, I'm just going to go and talk and talk and talk and talk. No, it requires commitment and work. Therapy is hard. It's not something easy to do. I like to remind like people that go to therapy that you're probably going to go to therapy and you're going to feel like shit. It's not going to make you feel better. But let me explain why. So you're having to like dig up these like memories that or experiences that you really haven't wanted to deal with. So what have you done? Kind of pushed it, and just pushed it in the back of your mind where you're not going to deal with it, where it kind of doesn't come up. But sometimes it comes up when it rains and floods, right? So you're having to kind of dig that out and be like, okay, it's time to deal with it. And that is so hard. So anybody that says therapy is easy, it's not. It is a hard process. And if you're considering going to therapy, I applaud you. Let me give you a little clap. I applaud you, because it's not easy to go to therapy, and it's not easy to be in therapy. It requires a lot. It is emotionally draining. A lot of people, I have to remind my clients and tell them, hey, you coming here doesn't mean you're gonna feel better automatically. You'll feel better in the long run, but it's a roller coaster. There's some days you might come to therapy and you'll be like, oh man, that kind of lifted a burden off me. It was so good to talk to somebody and tell somebody that. And there's other days you might go and talk about something and you leave just feeling like crap, and you like ugly cry in the session. That's what I call it. I call it ugly cry, and I have ugly cried many times in my life. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you need an ugly cry. Your body needs that. It feels better. Well, it feels good after you ugly cry. At least that's been my experience. I don't know about y'all. Let me know. So just like know that therapy is not going to be easy. It's going to be something hard, but it's worth it at the end. Also, another thing I want to talk about is, where do you find these therapists? So if you're looking for a therapist, there are many different places. One of the places that I like to share is Latinx Therapy. That is LATINX therapy.com. And that is a directory of Latinx, Latino, and Latina counselors and therapists all over the United States. So you're like, Marisol, I'm not in Houston. Where can I find it? Well, go to latinxtherapy.com. You can find yourself a Latino or Latina or Latinx counselor there. There's also Melanin and mentalhealth.com, which is another directory. And then Psychology Today. So those are all directories where you can find a therapist. And finding a therapist is an interesting job because, I don't know if I've shared my experience with therapy. The first time I went to therapy, it sucked so bad. And this was before I was a counselor. I was in college. That's the first time I went to therapy. And, I went to this therapist at the school, at the university. And I went like 3 times and I was like, this isn't for me. This guy, he's not understanding me. He was a white male counselor. So I was like, no, this isn't working. I remember going to each session, and each session I just cried and tried to explain to him what was going on. But I didn't feel understood. Like, he wasn't like getting it. And I was like, this is not working. But I don't think he was a bad counselor. I just think he wasn't the counselor for me. And that happens. Sometimes you go and talk to a counselor and you're like, I don't know if this is a counselor for me. And that's okay. It takes kind of time to find somebody that you're comfortable with. Now I've learned through my own therapy process that what I need is a bilingual counselor. A counselor that either looks like me or has the same cultural background. And that's just something that works for me. Maybe that necessarily isn't true for you, but I'm just sharing what works for me and what I found. So that's why I'm letting y'all know about the Latinx Therapy and melanin and mental health. That's a hard word for me to say. So those are places you can find therapists. And remember, if you go to therapy and you're like, oh, I don't know about this counselor, I'm not vibing with them, it's okay to look for somebody else. Trust me, we're not going to be offended if you're like, I don't know if you're the right counselor for me. And we can even provide you with referrals, because I know that that's a reality. I'm not going to be the best counselor for everyone. I'll be the best counselor for somebody, but maybe not for the next person. And that's okay, because we all have different needs. So I hope that you learn about therapy and counseling. And if you are looking to for a therapist, that you're able to find one with one of the resources I gave you. So I also, if you want to check out my blog post, there'll be links to these websites that I mentioned. And if you're thinking to yourself, hey Marisol, this is a good topic that I would like to share with my mom or my dad or somebody, but they only speak Spanish, I'll be recording this same episode in Spanish, so you can share with your Spanish-speaking friends or family, or just somebody that you know would benefit from this information, because I know it really doesn't exist out there.
So I had a post on Instagram where you could ask me questions about any questions y'all had about therapy, and I'm going to answer some in this podcast. One of the questions I received was, do therapists accept insurance? Yes, they do. Not all therapists accept insurance, but some of them do. One thing you can do is, when you call a therapist, you can ask them, do you accept this type of insurance? And they'll tell you, like, from the get-go, yes or no. or in the directories that I provided y'all. I think you're able to look on there as well if the therapist accepts your insurance or not. So, yes, some therapists do accept insurance. If not, maybe your insurance can cover your services through out of network. If that therapist doesn't accept insurance, they could probably provide a super bill, and that's something that you can ask them. Okay, you don't accept my insurance, but can you provide a super bill so I can send it to my out of network insurance? But make sure that your insurance covers out of network services as well, because not all insurances cover out of network services. So call your insurance and ask them what your benefits are, so you know if they do or they do not cover certain therapists, or if they cover out of network services. Another question I received is, how do you know you've chosen the right therapist? So like I shared with y'all, when the first time I went to therapy, the way I knew that that wasn't the right therapist for me was because I felt that they didn't understand what I was coming from, that we really didn't match. And it was just, I didn't feel heard when I went to therapy. So one thing you can do to know that that's the right counselor for you is, when you go to therapy, do you feel like this person is hearing you out? And if they're compassionate, non-judgmental, that they're there and they care about the situation you're going through. Because if you feel that that person's judging you, or they're doing something that you don't feel comfortable with, then those are signs that that's not the right therapist for you. For example, there's people that look specifically for a Christian counselor, like somebody that's Christian, that provides counseling within the Christian perspective. So they'll look for someone that specializes in that. And there's counselors that do Christian counseling. So, and there's other people that look for counselors that have knowledge and work with the LGBT community. I mean, all counselors work with the LGBT community, but maybe that person feels more comfortable with somebody that identifies with the LGBT community opposed to someone that's cis. So there's just a lot of different factors that go into finding a therapist and knowing that if that's the right therapist for you, and also making sure that that person is helping you, because you don't want to go to therapy and just sit there and talk and talk and talk and talk and get nothing out of therapy. Yes, one of our jobs is to listen, but we also challenge you when you need to be challenged. We also provide other things. It's not just listening. That's only part of the therapeutic process. There's a lot of other things that go into, for example, like I said, teaching coping skills, like defining what your goals are, and just a lot of other things. So if you just go in there and all they do is listen and they don't do anything else, I mean, that's great and all, but that's not all therapy is. Another question I received is, what's the best way to find a good match for a therapist or a counselor? So kind of look into what you're looking for, like what type of therapist are you looking for? Because there's many different types of therapists, like I explained in the beginning, and we do different types of therapy. There's art therapy, music therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, person-centered therapy, EMDR. What else? There's so many different types of therapy out there. So kind of see what you think's gonna work for you, and that I think that will be a good way to see where you start looking at to kind of narrow down your search. Or maybe you're looking for a specialist in trauma or a specialist in sex related issues. A lot of therapists specialize in different things, and if you for example, if you have an issue like a marriage and family, right? If you have a couples issue and you want to do couples therapy, you want to go with somebody that specializes in couples opposed to just going with a regular therapist. Because yes, we can, like a regular therapist can treat couples, but you would benefit more from going to a couples therapist because that's their specialty. Just like in doctors, you have different specialties like pediatrics, cancer, or oncologist is the like right word, right? What else? Cardiologist and all these other ologists there are. Same with therapy. We have different specialties. So it's something you want to ask that therapist when you call. You could call them and say, okay, I think I'm depressed. Do you specialize in depression? Or I think I'm having XYZ. Do you specialize in this? Or I had this trauma. Do you specialize in trauma and grief? Things like that. So that's a way that you can see if you're choosing the correct therapist for you and finding a good match for you and what you're wanting to go to therapy for. So another question I received is, how long does therapy take? And that's a question I get asked often, but I don't ever have an answer to because each case is different. I can't say, oh, you're only going to have to go to 5 sessions and you'll be fine. It really depends on what you're going through, what's the issue, and how fast you move through like whatever the motions are for therapy. It can be something that you might only have to go a couple of months. There's other people that have to go for a year. It really depends on a number of factors. So we can't tell you, oh, just see me 2 or 3 times and you'll be fine, because that's not realistic. That rarely happens. I have yet to see somebody that I'm like, oh yeah, 3rd session, everything's good. No, at least I haven't had that experience yet. So I'm talking about myself and my experiences. So like I said, it really depends on what's going on. Maybe you just need to go a couple of months, a couple of sessions, but it depends on your situation, what's going on, and how fast like the therapy process goes. Some people like process fast, and other people's it's just a lot happen and it takes longer to process. And another question is, how many times do I have to go to therapy? I mean, some people go like once a week. Other people go like bi-monthly, like twice a month. And there's other people that need to go to therapy twice a week. Like I said, it depends on the person, the individual, and it's on a case-by-case basis. And your therapist will talk to you about this. Like, there's going to be a treatment plan, and they'll say, okay, I want to see you like once a week or twice a week or every other week, whatever they see that is best for you. And it's going to be something that both of you will talk about. So it's not just going to be the therapist saying, hey, this is what I think, this is what goes. It's going to be like both of you working on that treatment plan. Because at the end of the day, the expert of your life is you. Therapist is not the expert on your life. You are the expert in your life. So you have to have input on what's going to happen and like how that's going to happen. So if you have additional questions, send me a DM on Instagram and I'll go try to include them in a story, or maybe I'll make another episode. As always, if you want me to talk about a difficult topic, email me at oyeletstalk@gmail.com or send me a DM on Instagram. My handle is oyeletstalk. And as a reminder, the information provided and any comments or opinions expressed are intended for general discussion and education purposes only. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you give us a 5-star rating on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. If you would like to support the Oye Let's Talk podcast, consider donating a cafecito or a coffee. You can donate at ko-fi.com, and that is ko-fi.com/Oye Let's Talk. I'm a big night owl, and coffee always helps fuel me to be able to create all this content for y'all.